I Will Hold Space for Your Darkness, a first responder mental health podcast hosted by me, Erin Jane, where we have conversations about what it's like to perform a first responder role and the mental health challenges that can accompany it. Hello and welcome to another episode of I Will Hold Space for Your Darkness. I am your host, Erin Jane, and today we are joined by Mr. Keith Hanks. Keith is a retired firefighter and EMT with 21 years of service in Massachusetts, including roles as a training officer and instructor. He's now a mental health advocate, speaking out and educating people on PTSD, substance abuse, and suicide prevention in the first responder community. And he's also the driving force behind the incredible documentary First Responders in Crisis. And honestly, this is kind of just to name a few of the strings that Keith has on his bow. He's also an author. He's an international public speaker. He has been a podcast guest on many, many wonderful podcasts, and the list could go on. So before I give him a giant head, Keith, welcome.
Hi, Erin. Thanks for having me on today.
No, wonderful to have you on. Thank you so much for agreeing to come on.
Absolutely.
So yes, from your wealth of experience, I would like to take you back to the start. And we just briefly discussed offline that I watched the wonderful documentary First Responders in Crisis. So I have learnt a little bit about your history. But if you could just tell the listeners, from my understanding, you joined the fire department at a really young age. Would you be able to tell us about that, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up in a firefighting and military family. I can actually trace my firefighting roots back to 1875.
I saw that. That's incredible.
It's pretty cool. You know, we're all about tradition in the fire service, and that's a pretty cool tradition.
Definitely.
Military-wise, I have family that were, as far back as like the Civil War. So,
wow.
Growing up, it was very much, I always joked that I was potty trained at gunpoint. You know what I mean? It was very disciplined, not a lot of emotions and whatnot, but there was a lot of pride when it comes to service community. So there was no question that I was going to join the fire service at a very young age, and I did.
Okay.
And so I got in as a senior in high school, actually.
Wow.
Yeah. I actually got sworn in 2 days after my 18th birthday, and that was in 1996 because I'm old and older, I guess.
I won't tell you where I was in 1996.
Yeah, I'm guessing probably around kindergarten or something like that.
And I'm older than that. It's all right. I was in grade 6 in primary school.
Still pretty young. So yeah, I got in young, and everyone in my family did. All my uncles got in when they were 18. So it was sort of tradition, and I worked both municipal fire for a couple of different towns and privatized EMS in the bigger cities for 21 years until 2017, when I ended up getting out I went out on medical due to my PTSD that I was diagnosed with in 2015. Everything just got to be too much.
Yep.
Back then there wasn't enough resources and enough talk about this that I wasn't getting the direction I needed to be able to stay on the job. And so I came off the job, and I had already started advocating on social media for mental health because I saw that people were suffering in silence, and I thought it was horseshit.
Yep.
So that kind of just started growing, and it's gotten to what I do today, which is, everything that you pretty much already mentioned. And a lot of stuff, just a lot of kind of finding my identity it was really the theme of that journey.
Yep. And I would say as well, like, as sort of someone as well who has left a first responder career, like, I think it can be really daunting to leave something that's so recognizable and so identifiable. So then finding yourself and finding your voice and finding, I guess, like your purpose outside of that, especially when you come from such like a long lineage of service, you are still of service to the community, and it's just in like a different aspect.
Yeah. And it's ironic. I actually just saw one of my contacts on one of my social media things put up a post about identity, how, you, especially in the first responder role, you spend decades doing a job and then you retire to find out that now you have a new task of trying to figure out who you are.
Yeah.
Because you had that tangible thing, that badge or whatever that told you who you were. And now you're trying to find out at whatever age you are, who you really are.
Exactly. That badge, that uniform, like all that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Being told what to do, how to do it, and when.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so, joining it at such a young age, like you said, it was kind of almost like predetermined that you were going to join a fire department. Did anything else ever go through your mind to do, or it was just always just like, boom, that's for me?
So it's truth be told, it's not that I never didn't want to be a firefighter. I was always told I was going to be. So it wasn't, other options weren't made as available. But I always wanted to be a cook. And
Oh, wow.
I was actually going to go and down to Rhode Island to the cooking school down there. And as my high school career was coming to a close, it became evident that that wasn't going to be supported.
Oh, right.
And so I went to fire school instead. And I don't regret it because I ended up learning how to cook pretty well as a firefighter anyway. And any of the bucketheads out there know we all know how to cook. So I got to do both, and I have no regrets with my career. I really don't.
Yeah. Yeah. And so you said that you like worked at sort of multiple fire departments and multiple like EMS organizations along your time. Talk to me about sort of like the transition through your career of, you know, what was when and what you found sort of most, you know, maybe joyful, or what you found most challenging. Like I know from the documentary you had an incredibly challenging first fatality fire only 3 months into your career.
Yeah. So I started when I was obviously a senior in high school. Like I said, I started as an on-call member, which depending on what part of the country you're from, is same as volunteer.
Okay.
And so, the first like 4 months were pretty hectic. It was the 90s, so we had different things. We had a lot more fires back then.
Yeah. Different materials.
And different materials, you know, with training wasn't as like it is now. And the March after I got on, we had a fighter of suicide, murder suicide, and the same fire we actually almost lost our fire chief.
Jesus.
And it was a lot because I was in the first truck that arrived on scene.
Yep.
And the call itself is really bad. But I always tell that story, whether I present or, you know, I come on a podcast, whatever it is, because it's what happened after that's really important, that set the foundation. And it was the critical incident stress debriefing, which they call meetings now, or management, whatever it is. And, you know, we walk into this room that's being conducted by this older gentleman, and, you know, there's like 15 of us in there, mostly men. And, you know, we all got our arms crossed, and we got our stern looks, and we're, you know, don't talk to us kind of thing. And he goes around and he's like, so you guys had a bad fire. You almost lost your fire chief. Does anyone want to share any feelings? And it's like, it was said in that manner where none of the guys in that room were going to share anything. And I'm 18 years old, sitting with another senior who got on the department with me, and another 2 members who were there at that fire who got on that were older.
Yep.
And we're all looking around the room hoping that one of the senior guys, one of the, you know, salty members of the department were going to say something, and no one did. And it set the foundation right there in that room. In March of 97. I was like, I got to hold this in. I do have to suck it up.
Yeah.
Because no one else is going to share. Everyone else is sucking it up. I have to suck it up. And that, you know, 26 years ago, set the foundation for what I did for most of my career.
Yeah.
And, so I started as an on-call. It quickly shifted to doing, day tours, and eventually I got into private EMS and started working 24-hour shifts, and then I started doing 24-hour shifts in the fire service. So it went from being an on-call member to working like 96 to 120 hours a week.
Wow.
And I worked in some pretty crazy systems. I worked in, for those that know Massachusetts, I worked in Lawrence, Mass, Lowell, Lawrence, and Haverhill, which are very, Lawrence was actually one of the most violent cities in Massachusetts for a long time.
Yeah. Would it be sort of considered a more of like a lower socioeconomic area? Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of poverty, a lot of crime, there was a lot of domestic violence and rapes while I was there.
Yeah.
So, you know, a lot of different levels of working, both, you know, going in for a long shift and then also being at home and having to go in for a call while doing everything. So it was a little bit of everything throughout my career.
Yeah. Yeah. And you also, from my understanding, like had a family sort of quite young too.
Yeah, right out of the gate, right? And I got married young, we had kids young, and that added to it. And when you're working 100 hours a week as a parent, especially in the first responder world, you miss out on a lot.
Yeah.
And I missed out on quite a bit with my two older kids, trying to run and gun in the first responder world like I was.
Yeah. Yeah, it can be, I think it's incredibly challenging. I sort of see it with my husband, like that kind of pull between, all right, I have to go and provide for my family and, and a good wage and good living and all that kind of thing. But then, yeah, like, thank God, like there's FaceTime and we get to, call him
Right.
before bed, and we live in the town that he works for, so we can stop by and drop off cookies and say hello. But yeah, like I feel like that pull either way could just be so heartbreaking as a parent at times.
It's a tough balance. And I didn't grow up with a lot of good role models for parents, and so I thought what I was doing was actually pretty stellar. And I didn't realize till years later that I was actually very much not there for my kids in the beginning of their lives, and it would cause later ripples, for sure.
Yeah, and I think as well that's something that's difficult to address is how you're a parent but you're still a human, and then you're going to work, like you're saying, 120 hours, and you're getting exposed to the effects of like cumulative trauma, and then the effect that has on you, and then you come home and it can bleed into them, or you are acting or basically just trying to cope in some kind of survival mode, and it impacts them, and it's the last thing that you would ever want to do, but sometimes it's inevitable.
Yeah, and especially back then where there wasn't a lot of talk about how we deal with this, how we deal with what we see on the job, and maybe even what we were, the hand we were dealt before we got on the job. We weren't talking about this. I come from a generation that, the 70s and 80s, there was so much childhood abuse going on. They had a cartoon campaign trying to sideline the amount of abuse that was happening. That there was, the child exploitation thing back in the 80s that was, they saw a problem. And so many of us who were on the job, anyone between the age of 40 and like 55, bring with us something that has nothing to do with the job, that has made what we see in the job sometimes much worse.
Yeah. And there's all, it's kind of about those like adverse childhood experiences, like, it's called like an ACE score. And
yes.
And that is something that, again, it's not spoken about very often, that it's not just what you see on the job. It is, like you were saying, it's all of your past experiences, and it's biological and it's genetic. Like you can have certain levels of predisposition to suffering from a mental illness or having a vulnerability in certain areas. And then depending on the line of work that you choose, it can impact you so heavily. And sometimes the way that you do react or the way that you learn to cope, it's so completely out of your control. And I think it impacts people in so drastically, like psychologically, because when they're like, well, this didn't affect that person, so why the fuck is it affecting me?
Right. Exactly.
And yeah.
Right. And I think the thing we always forget too is we're humans. I think first responders always think they live by what we're termed with, and that's like we're superheroes. And we're really not. We're human beings who do a job that most can't.
Yeah. No, very much so. And it was there was I'll see if I can find it. There was a quote that one of your friends, Dave, on the documentary said, and I actually wrote it down because I thought it was really important. He said, "You're a firefighter. You're meant to be tough. You help people. You don't need help."
Yep.
And
that was always the mentality. And you have to be a tough guy, right? That was always, and you do. And I want full disclosure. Like when we're on a bad call, we're doing, we're in the suck, we're doing what we have to do.
Yeah.
You absolutely have to turn everything else off, and you have to be on point,
100%.
And you have to be able to put everything in your life off to the side to do something that is potentially the most horrifying thing in your life. But what isn't spoken of and what isn't enforced and what isn't trained on is, how do you bring those dials back down
Yep.
to living like a normal human being and dealing with what you see that most people don't see that routinely?
Yeah.
You know, that's the issue. It's not that we have to turn these dials all the way to one side to be able to do our job. It's that we don't get trained how to turn them back up.
Yeah, it's like striking that balance, because like you're saying, like compartmentalization is actually incredibly important to be able to maintain a level of professionalism while you are doing that job. You know, like I felt it when I was a cop and attending certain things, and you just be like, man, this is really fucking heavy, but it's not my job to be affected by it right now. Like that is for, you know, after work, when I go home, whatever. But like right now, you know, strap my balls to the fucking wall and like, let's get it done. And that, but yeah, like you're saying, and then finding that balance, and especially as men, like, you know, generally like you know, to see like a female cry or show emotion or get upset over something, like society wide, like, you know, that's generally kind of either more anticipated or more expected. Whereas, you know, especially in the first responder realm, like that being stoic, and the culture and stigma around men showing emotion in general, let alone in that kind of profession, like it's obviously something that needs to change, but it's something that I feel like you guys, you know, would have been hamstrung by for such a long time.
Ever. Generations, you know, and I think we're slowly breaking free of it, though.
Yep. And that was, and we will get to it, but that was one of the most powerful aspects of the documentary, was watching this, you know, I would call them brave, this brave and courageous group of men, like just being so open and sharing so many things that, you know, they probably weren't really comfortable doing, but they did it anyway. And I think it was truly remarkable.
It was an amazing experience, that's for sure.
Yeah. And so also you said that you had sort of got to a point in your career as well where you became like an instructor and a training officer and all that kind of thing. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I had always wanted to sort of, I don't know, mold the next generation of minds on the job. And because I had incredible instructors when I got on the fire service. And so pretty much in the first year, I started doing training right away with the fire department. And within probably a year of doing private EMS, a couple of years after that, I ended up doing training. And it just was something that followed me right to the end of my career. And, you know, I spent a short time, but a year and a half, working at the Mass Fire Academy in the around 2000.
Okay.
And it was always just being there to give, and not just like instruction, like being able to guide and help people figure out the best way to do their career, you know, at least the on the job part, was always something that I felt was very important. And I think that I still think that way. And a lot of that has to do with the great instructors I had in the beginning of my career.
And what, if anything, is ever addressed, like even at the time that you went through the academy, was anything about mental health ever addressed?
Not even a little bit. Not when I got on 96. There was, you know, there was always the, you're going to see bad shit. That was never, you know, sugar-coated. That was never hidden.
Yeah.
But it wasn't, you're going to see bad shit. It's going to affect you. You're going to want to drink and drug. You're going to lose sleep. You're not going to sleep for weeks. You're going to beat your wife. You're going to yell at your kids. You know, none of that was addressed. It was just, you know, you're going to do this. Shut up. Don't talk about it. And get ready for the next call. And it stuck that way for a very long time. And honestly, it's only been the last probably 5 to 10 years that we're starting to be like, okay, we need to talk about this a little bit more. And I know that they are addressing it, at least in the Mass Fire Academy. They are now addressing this with a, you know, 2-hour lecture on it, but at least it's something.
And it also sort of sounds like, you know, from everything I hear too, there's more out at like station level, and there's, you know, state CISM teams, and Mr. Moran, who has, from the documentary, has like started, was it the Hilltree? I wrote it down. Hilltop. There you go. There's so many more things like that have kind of like organically popped up that are also, you know, hopefully filling like some of the voids that exist too.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that makes, first responders so unique when it comes to how we want to, navigate the healing process is that we don't necessarily want to lay on a couch and stare at a ceiling and tell a therapist our, deepest, darkest secrets. That is beneficial, and I've done a
Has
lot of
its
that.
place.
But it has its place, and it can be used in conjunction with other things. But one of the biggest things a lot of us are seeing more beneficial or more benefits from is like the animal therapy and being in situations like farms and doing like rudimentary things where you're using your hands and you're actually finding that we're grounding ourselves and getting that chance to breathe. And that's really where Brian from the film in his Hilltop Farm retreat really kind of comes in, is that sometimes just being in a very simplistic situation
Yep.
with animals out in the open, breathing, that's all we need. We just need that 8
Yep.
hours where, there's not house lights going on, there's not gongs going off, there's not license sirens, everything doesn't have to be done that split second. Yep. We can take some time, we can stretch our legs, we can breathe, we can calm down, and that we get more benefit from than sometimes, not all the time, sometimes than doing talk
Yep.
therapy or, shoveling a bunch of pharmaceuticals down our throat to hide the symptoms.
Yeah. No, and that makes a lot of sense. And you actually sort of make me think about, my own life. Like my husband is a big hunter. So going and being quiet in, like 100 acres and it's actually just kind of like, as you were talking, like it's really hit me. And I know he finds a lot of solace going up there and doing that. But I think you're right. Like, I think for him, it's almost like his version of therapy, because he goes out there, there's no phone signal, and he sits in a tree stand for, like 10, 12 hours and is just quiet. Like we live in like the inner city, and it's just always noisy. We live on a thoroughfare. Every first responder vehicle that is in town, like, goes down our street. And I think you're right. Like, it's just that serenity that you find in that level of solitude. Like, I think it does have a lot of amazing benefits. And like you said, there's room for talk therapy, there's room for CBT, there's room for EMDR, equine therapy. Like, there is room for so much, and each individual is so unique and different with their experiences and their trauma impact that, Christ, I just think, like, if you find what works for you, all power to you.
Yeah, and I think it ends up being a combination, honestly.
Yeah.
And that's how I live my life now, is a combination of things.
And it sounds like as well you've sort of entered the realm of finding, meditation somewhat helpful too. It's another aspect.
Yeah, I suck at meditation. I will be honest. I am a very much a work in progress when it comes to meditating. My buddy Steve, who's in the film as well, who is funny because he got me into meditation. And Steve's a 3-tour combat Marine, and to meet this guy and to develop the relationship we did, and to have him pushing meditation on me, it's one of the funnier parts of our friendship. And he is very good at meditation, but it has taken me a long time to get to the point where I can slow everything down. So what I actually incorporate more into my life every day is mindfulness, which is different, right? And one of the things I've realized is that I can actually get myself more into the now, into the moment, by doing anything as simple as washing dishes, it sounds like chores, but doing laundry, reading a book, sitting in a chair and feeling the carpet, walking on the grass. I use mindfulness more than I really meditate. I meditate like once a day, but I use mindfulness, and it really, a lot of us with, trauma from the job, or, cumulative trauma, complex PTSD, it's really just, everything is just going all the time. And if you can get yourself to the point where something as simple as, washing a dish in the sink can get you to come down and be where you are in that exact moment, sometimes it quiets all that stuff just long enough for you to enjoy the rest of that hour. Not even the day, just that hour.
And like you said, like, if that, one thing works for Brian and this works for you, and you found what works for you, and it's so incredibly important. Like, I discovered, box breathing or tactical breathing or whatever you want to call it. And I find such sort of relief in that, because like for me, when I do it, I can't concentrate on anything else because I'm thinking in my head, like I'm counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4 in my head. And it means
Yep.
I physically and cognitively can't think about anything else because I'm counting and just watching my breaths.
Yeah.
And that is like sort of one thing that I find like helps calm me if I'm in need of it, because you just kind of go, all right. And then it's like just a wave of calm comes over you and you're like, oh, I needed that.
Yeah, breath work's wicked important.
And again, like you said, like instead of popping a pill for, anxiety, that's going to maybe give me that same wave of calm, which, I'm fortunate that I like haven't needed. But yeah, I love finding the kind of same benefit, whether it's through exercise or breath work or anything like that, like finding those health benefits in a natural way. I think it's incredible.
Anything you can do on your own to benefit your own healing is more self-gratifying than anything else. I mean, it really is. And that's going to lead to more substantial healing down the road when it's things that you can control.
And that intrinsic motivation too of like, oh, I'm doing this because I find pure joy in it and I know that it's really good for me, not trying to seek that external validation and extrinsic motivation, like I think that sort of comes into play too.
Absolutely. 100% agree.
So we've sort of touched like a little bit on, the mental health aspects of being a firefighter. And I'm not sure how much you want to address it, but I am aware that you lost your first wife, Heather, in a car accident at some point during your firefighting career. And then in the first of all, I'm really sorry about that loss.
Thank you.
And you spoke about it in the documentary that after coming back, I would presume you had, some time off. After coming back, you ended up going to like a lot of car accidents and stuff like that. Talk to me about how you coped in the aftermath of still having to go to work and be exposed to the same kind of things that took your wife from you.
It was a tough spot. I was very young. I was 24 when my first wife died. When my children were young. And, because, none of the issues I had, with trauma had been resolved or dealt with at all. When I went back to work and, I had about 6 weeks off after the accident in 2003. And when I went back to work, one of the first major holidays was July 4th. And, it was every shift that was just accident upon accident. Some were very minor. But I was going to accidents that were far worse than anything else I had dealt with up to that point, or at least it felt that way. And honestly, for the very first couple of years, it just felt like punishment. It felt like I was being punished. Like, oh, you survived, she didn't, so you're going to deal with this, and you're going to see other people's pain every day. Is what it felt like. This is how I translated it back then. And it made going to work very difficult. And I missed quite a bit of time from here to there. I think I was contemplating leaving the job very early on after the accident. And so I dealt with it in very piss poor ways, honestly. I drank and drug like a champ. And, drinking was already something that I had, pretty much mastered at that point, being Irish. And it was...
Irish from Massachusetts? Are you kidding?
Really? I mean, come to find out, I'm actually more Scandinavian than Irish, which is probably why I'm 6.5 feet tall.
There you go.
But drinking became very natural, and at the time, we didn't have the opioid crisis, so I could get my hands on pills like there was no tomorrow. And so I used this not just to say I drank and drug. I used it because I didn't want to feel all this shit. And with feeling the sadness, which I wasn't allowing myself to feel, I was getting anger. And my anger was on a level like unmatched by anyone else I knew, and I didn't want to feel it. And so drinking and drugging allowed me to not feel it. And I mastered it. I did it for a very long time after that accident. So when I knew I was going to go into work and deal with someone else's accident, I wouldn't feel it. And I didn't for a long time.
There was something you said in the documentary that, again, I wrote down a few quotes. But you said, my soul was gone. I was never going to show emotion again.
And I didn't for a very long time. Years. Actually, I'll be honest, looking back on it, it was probably well into my relationship with my current wife before I was starting to allow myself to feel anything. And I met her, 8 years after that accident. And so we're talking at least a decade before I was really, truly feeling things again or trying to.
And so when you did start to feel things again or allow yourself to, like, did it come in a way that was like you were in control of, or something happened and it was like a fucking faucet that then, like, you couldn't turn off?
It was the latter. And thank God for my wife. I mean, Adele's an incredible human being, and I knew this from day one. And the only person that I was able to experience anything with in comfort and feeling safe with was her. But because it came in like a faucet, and it was like, oh, holy shit, what the fuck is this? I ended up on pharmaceuticals again. I ended up taking a bunch of pills. I ended up at one point, I was taking like 9 different meds. And because they didn't diagnose me at that point with PTSD, they thought I was bipolar because of all the mood shifts. So I was zombified. I ended up getting so many meds in me that I had no emotional spectrum. And, a blank facade. I had you couldn't read me. I could walk into a room and I could have just watched the baby explode, and you wouldn't have been able to tell. I had none. And it came in like a flood, and because it came in a flood, it was very uncomfortable. And so I shut it down again, only this time, instead of drinking and illegal drugs, I did it with pharmaceuticals and had basically the same effect.
And I mean, throughout this time, like, obviously I know that your friend Dave was in the car during the car accident, and it sounds like you had, a really lovely group of friends at work. Was anyone addressing any of the behavior that you were exhibiting, or saying, hey mate, like, maybe lay off on the booze? Or did they know about the drug taking? Like, did anyone know anything?
I think the drug taking was very, very secretive, for sure, because it still is, and it should be. It's very taboo, and it shouldn't. You shouldn't take drugs in the way I was. But the drinking, because of the culture, it was almost supported. It was like, well, of course you're going to drink. You're not even 30 years old. You buried your wife a few years ago. You do a job that is at times horrifying. And I think everybody, it was like this unspoken thing that, hey, we're not dealing with this, but you're dealing with it by drinking. So we all do that. That's okay. And it was really no fault of any of my friends. I mean, I think, these days it's hard to tell because I'm just, such a gentle, warm, welcoming looking guy that back in the day I wasn't. Back in the day I played stoic like nobody's business, and I was very, very standoffish. And given my stature and my height, that adds into it. And when you're a big guy, one of the biggest in your circle, and you've been through what I have, no one wants to address that, and it's no fault of theirs. It was really me being like, no, stand the fuck back. It's my life. I'm going to do what I need to do, because at that point, that's what everyone in my family did. And so I thought I was doing the right thing. And so, no, none of my friends tried to really intervene. And there was really never a conversation in a helpful way of, hey, maybe you're not doing this right.
Yeah. And I mean, I hope it didn't come across like I was like, they'd done this. But I mean, and I think maybe as well, like, part of it could have been that they probably saw elements of themselves in you, and maybe that scared them. Maybe they were trying to cope in similar kind of ways, and it's like, well, if I call him out, then shit, I could have exactly. And you just go, oh fuck. So you talked about, obviously, a lot of like maladaptive coping mechanisms and stuff like that. And it sounds like things sort of leveled out a little bit when you met your lovely wife Adele. Was there a point that sort of things started to decline again?
Yeah. So probably about 2014, I had reconnected. It was actually late 2013. I had reconnected with my father, who had been estranged for almost 30 years. And I reconnected with him. He was very sick. He had cancer, had a bunch of heart attacks, and he ended up dying within 6 months of us reconnecting. I didn't realize it at the time, but it was sort of like the straw that broke the camel's back when it came to my mental health. And so that was 2014, a few months before me and Adele ended up getting married. And so the following year in 2015 was the first time I went somewhere to get appropriate help for my my traumas specifically. And that's when I get diagnosed with PTSD. And I was very hopeful. Hey, we have a direction. We have what's going on. We know what's going on. This is going to be great. And it actually, at first, made things worse because I was having to face shit. A lot of stuff. I mean, at that point, I was 30. I'm bad at math right now. 37-ish. I was past my mid-30s or in my mid-30s, and to be, facing a bunch of stuff that I have been denying for decades came at a price. And I did well. And obviously, a couple years after getting diagnosed, I left the job, like I said. But I became complacent because at that point, I wasn't dealing with the feelings and emotions that were really what I had to deal with. I was talking about what happened. So I got complacent. So I was like, baselining. I was on a straight. I wasn't going up. I wasn't going down. I was going straight. So eventually it was either going to go up or it was going to go down. And what ended up happening was, so my wife Adele has a autoimmune disease known as lupus, and which most people with the end of the spectrum of lupus that she has get told you can't get pregnant. We ended up getting told we could. We got pregnant. We were very happy about it. Towards the end, she ended up having some serious issues. Long story abridged, we ended up delivering 6 weeks early. And it almost killed my wife. We almost lost our daughter, Riley, who ended up being okay. But it was a turning point. And because I was complacent, bless you. Because I was complacent, I wasn't aware what was happening. And because that situation had its obvious, tags back to my previous life, I spiraled. But because I had a wife to take care of and because I had a newborn child, I was worried about them. And I put myself off, and everyone else in my life kind of wasn't worried about me at that point. No fault of anyone's. And so I spiraled and I got into a very dark place and ended up leading to what I call my last suicide attempt in December of 2019, which, thankfully didn't work. But that attempt and everything leading up to it is where I sort of had a turning point where I realized that I was going to have to take my trauma by the balls and I was going to have to face shit I was going to be very uncomfortable facing. And so it was really the beginning of 2020 when things really shifted.
When, the world was like a really awesome place to be in.
Yeah. Thumbs up all around for that. Yeah. April 2020 was just an amazing time in this country.
Worldwide, I think. Worldwide. So I kind of want to go back to, you said your final suicide attempt. Does that mean, and I don't know if you're comfortable talking about it, and if you're not, that's okay. Does that mean that there had been prior attempts?
I have had 6 suicide attempts in my life. My first one being at age 13.
Wow.
And so between age 13 and 41, I had 6.
Wow.
And for me, it was always overdoses. It was always an attempted overdose, pills and usually booze. My last one involved a gun. It was something that it was like an unspoken agreement. It sounds messed up, but an agreement with me and my wife that if I ever got in a dark place, it would never involve a gun. And this last one it did. And the fucked up part with this is, and I didn't realize at the time, and I definitely didn't look at it this way when it happened, but the
Yeah.
gun jammed. It actually double fed around into the chamber, and at the time, I was upset because it didn't work, obviously, and I just needed the pain
Yeah.
to be over. But very quickly after, when I was inpatient, I actually ended up being a roommate with a cop, and we talked about it one day, and I realized that that just doesn't
Yeah.
happen, especially with the sidearm
Yeah.
I used. It just doesn't happen, and so I started looking at this as a sign, because I don't believe in coincidences. I don't believe in blah blah blah. I believe in signs, and I believe in things happening
Yeah.
because they need to happen. And it finally hit me when I was inpatient, and then the pandemic hit, and that was awesome. But it was a turning point.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I want to say thank you for being so open and honest and sharing that, because I think it is really important for people who might be feeling that way to hear about it from someone like you. I think that's speaking your truth and being vulnerable and admitting like I felt like this in so many points across my life and across my existence, and it sounds like you were really really in the depths of a few of those times, and yet now here you are.
And it's important. It's also important for people who haven't been there, because I think it's hard. If you don't know, you don't know. And I've had a conversation recently with one of the people who, the fire chief that was actually featured in the documentary. He's a good friend. He was actually my training officer, Bubba. He's very open about the fact that he's never been
he said
suicidal.
that in the doco.
And we've had some conversations. I visit him from time to time at the firehouse, and we've had conversations, and even just from him, and this is someone with a military background, a man in his mid-50s, he's very open about, hey, I know it's very hard for you to talk about, but it is so appreciated to be able to hear where someone is when they're in that dark spot where they're thinking about ending their life, to hear what that perspective is, because it helps people on the outside maybe know how to approach people who are like that. Because you're not going to get someone to kill themselves if you ask them, are you going to kill yourself? You're not. It's never going to happen. That's never going to, I can almost 100% guarantee it's not. Because if someone would have asked me right before I was going to hurt myself, are you going to kill yourself? I may not have made that attempt, because that meant someone cared. And so I think it's important for those of us who are able to share these things. Because I think it helps people who have never been there understand what, suicidal ideation really is about, and where people really are. Because it's not about wanting to die. I've never wanted to die. I just didn't want to exist because the pain was too much. And I felt like I was just, I had shame. I brought shame to my family and my friends. It's not about wanting to die.
And that is a really important distinction. And again, like something that's highly misunderstood, that people are scared to say the word suicide because there's such connotations linked to it, and that fear, especially by people like you're saying who don't actually understand that. They're like, oh, well, like if I say it, I'm going to put that thought in their head. It's like, no, you're fucking not. Like, and like you said, like if someone cares enough to say, hey, like you're not acting like yourself, I'm worried about you, are you fucking considering this? Like you're saying, that means because that person fucking cares about you, and they are there to hear what that true answer is.
Yeah, and it's really even something as simple as, are you safe? And it's become, because when you do this, when you become someone who talks about this a lot, you end up networking with a lot of other people who have been through it. And with these people I've grown closer with, it's sort of like a thing when because I still go through stuff. I still have my bad days, and so do a lot of the other men and women I'm friends with, and we ask each other, we check each other all the time. Hey, I know you're going through some shit, and it's pretty normal to be going through it, but I need to make sure, are you safe? And sometimes something as simple as that just acknowledges that people aren't as self-centered as they sometimes seem, and that people do care.
And I think as well, like I was talking to, I interviewed Travis Gribble recently, and you and him and so many people in that space, like you spend your time reliving some of the most horrific things that you've gone through. And I think as well that can take such a heavy toll, that I always am so appreciative when I speak with someone like you, or I speak with someone like him, because I go, Jesus, like the pain and the heartache and just, you know, ripping the fucking Band-Aid off, like, of your own trauma all the time, like it would take a toll, and it would just make you have days where you're like, you know what, I cannot talk about that again. I can't discuss it again. I don't even want to think about it again. And it could just be so incredibly exhausting.
Right.
But like you're saying, like, it seems like you have such passion in trying to get your message out there, and especially quantifying it, like, hey, I'm not fucking perfect, but I'm willing to share my stuff, and if it helps one person, then hey, then it's all worth it.
And it's appropriate, because right now I'm wearing the shirt that says it. You got to own your shit, and that's been a very difficult thing for me to do, because you spend a long time with mental health. You do a lot of blaming, and maybe not everything is your fault, but at some point when it comes to mental health and specifically trauma, you have to own it. You have to take ownership in whatever it is, and you have to feel it. You're not going to heal it if you don't feel it.
Say that a lot, and I like it.
You know, owning it. I do. I say, you know, feeling it and healing it, and owning your shit's one of my biggest lines I always say, because it's 100% where I've gotten to where I'm at today is by doing those two things. And
so, clarify for me. So after your suicide attempt, then you said you went into a place for a little while.
Yes. Yeah. I ended up, I had already been a patient at McLean's Hospital here in Boston area.
They have a specialized first responder, either unit or program or something, haven't they?
Program. So I had been through their leader program, which is their first responder program, back in 2015. I was one of the first to go through it. And this time in 2020 or 2019 and 2020, I actually went general inpatient. And I ended up with, like, you know, 2 or 3 other first responders anyway. But it was this stay that, and I think it was because I was in with general population, that I started to face the more personal shit. It wasn't just the job that was affecting me, and I always knew this. It wasn't no secret in my head. It was during this stay that I was seeing people deal with regular stuff that I realized that I had significant regular stuff. And that's when I really did a turnaround, and I started realizing that there's a lot of other things to define who Keith is that have nothing to do with lights and siren, that have to do with just life. And that's when I really started facing them. And 2020 was just such a big turnaround for me when it comes to my journey and healing. And it's been, I wouldn't say always, it's always been upwards movement. But there's definitely been some plateaus, but it's really always been up, progressive, positive healing since then.
And was that, like, part of the genesis of where the idea for the documentary came from?
Yeah. I mean, I never really set out to make a film. Right. And sort of, and, you know, me and one of the producers, Scott, we talked about this in an interview we did a few months back. So Scott, one of the producers I went to high school with, actually, out here in Massachusetts. He was big into football, ended up coaching UCLA, and got into acting and stuff out there. And that's sort of how we connected. My initial, like, reaching out for, like, something was like, hey, can we do, like, an infomercial? Can we do, like, a 30-second bit on, like, hey, mental health is an issue in the first responder world? And he had been following me. And he's like, aren't you, like, trying to write a book? Or don't you do this? Aren't you advocating for this? And so, again, long story, extremely abridged. It turned into the documentary. It turned into, you know, telling sort of my story in the center of it, but bringing in 12 other people who supported that message and had their own story come to find out. And it really sort of, like, morphed into this very humbling experience, which in itself became a turning point for the people in the film. And I say that because out of the production team, out of the people interviewed, the families of the people interviewed, there's like a dozen people who have started their own self-care, their own healing process since this movie started getting filmed back in March of 2022, who have made leaps and bounds with their own healing. And so the movie itself, where we set out to try to help people, help the people in it.
That's remarkable.
And what better gift than that? What better, even if it never made it beyond that point, we helped 3/4 of the people who were part of this film just by making it. And that, to me, was one of the most rewarding and humbling experiences, probably short of a few other key events in my life. And it just sets the tone for what the film actually is.
And I we sort of been chatting offline for a bit, and I watched it yesterday, and it is, I mean, it's powerful. It is heartbreaking at times. And I think the thing that sort of resonated with me was there was like this really serious like juxtaposition or like dichotomy that it was quite like, as the wife of a firefighter of over 20 something years experience, it was a scary snapshot that you guys are all just regular blokes. You're all regular firefighters in like what Western Mass or Northwestern Mass, and all of the shit that everyone was kind enough to talk about and disclose. And that was just like a snapshot. Like you said, there were like, maybe like 10 of you interviewed along with like a couple of spouses and stuff like that. And I was just like, holy fucking shit. Like as a wife and a former first responder, I was like, damn, like it was heavy. But as I said, like the dichotomy and the juxtaposition of it was that it was truly inspiring to see this collective of men be so open to sitting down and having it recorded and spewing some of like the deepest, darkest shit that had happened to them. Like I definitely was like in tears for, a lot of it, because it was just, it really gets to your core. Like it really, really does, watching that. And I think it does, even if you aren't in the first responder realm, like seeing these people talk about their experiences, thank you for putting it out there. And anyone listening, I really, really strongly encourage you, please go and watch First Responders in Crisis, because it will change the way that you look at the people driving by in the police car and in the fire truck and in the ambulance. It really will.
And that was really our goal. And beyond just giving first responders hey, we feel you. We're all here. We're all going through it. It was really, like you said, it was like a snapshot for the public too. It was like, you ever wonder why sometimes when you're an asshole to a cop, why sometimes they bite your head off? This is why, because they may have just came from carrying a dead kid out of a house, or maybe their partner just got shot, or whatever it is. Or maybe even the firefighters, you're not getting a buttery reception from them because you lit your kitchen on fire trying to, do whatever. Maybe this is why, because we're not sitting there waiting for your emergency to come in. We've been to other ones. We've had some really terrible things happen to us, and we're human. We're just like you. We're just like the people we're trying to help. And, I know for the producers, it was a very, very mind-opening experience. And one of the cool things we did, the day we filmed at the farm, we actually filmed at Hilltop Farm. And that day we all sat down, and Hilltop catered like a dinner for us, and all the production and those who were filmed that day and our families all sat down at like a firehouse kitchen table sort of setup and had dinner. We broke bread with each other. We busted balls. And the two producers, who are not first responders, they are not from the first responder families, got to experience this and got included. And they got to see the real human side of what all of us are as men and women and families in the first responder world, that we're humans.
First and foremost.
We joke, first and foremost, beyond anything, which is probably why we can do this job so well, is that we're humans. And it was a very humbling experience, and they still hold on to it to this day. Matter of fact, that the premiere we did in Townsend, Mass, Scott and Corey, the two producers, talk about, they brought it up on their own about that night because it held so much meaning for them. to be included in our family. And that's really what this is we're a family.
And I think one of the aspects that almost every single person interviewed talks about is that firefighter kitchen table, coffee house chat, coffee house table, and like you all talk about, it's kind of the place where everything is addressed, where you bust balls, where you might all sit in fucking silence after a really shitty job, where one person's going to make an inappropriate joke or comment after a really shitty joke, or
that was literally me.
Exactly. Yeah. Or just, and even I think a few of them had sort of talked about, the peer support or the critical incident debriefings where no one really wanted to talk, that sometimes the organic conversation that was generated around that firehouse table is often kind of what everyone needs a little more than sometimes some are the other structured things, or what they're more comfortable with too.
Yep. We all get to experience that during filming, which was just awesome.
And talk to me about the origin of it. Was it always, it's going to sort of, I'm going to be at the center and then have a few extra people, and then how did you get them to agree? That's my one main question that I have.
So it always was going to center Corey, the main producer, who used his studios, Bold Soul Studios, was always very intrigued by my story. And so I was always going to be the through line. And honestly, we actually started filming because I actually did about 4 or 5 hours of film time, camera time. We actually were going to tell more of my story. And then we realized with more people we interviewed that we found the good mix. But when I started asking around, only a handful of the people interviewed do any sort of advocacy. Brian Harkins does advocacy. Steve Holmes does advocacy. Now Brian Moran runs the farm. But publicly, most of the people don't talk about this. And so when I started reaching around to the people I knew I wanted interviewed, there was definitely some nervous folks. I was nervous. I had never really done camera stuff. I've been speaking about it for years, but a lot of people what are they going to ask? Can I get a memo sheet of what they're going to ask?
And of course,
Corey's, can I get a spreadsheet on what's going to be the questions? And I'm like, so Corey don't work that way. He doesn't sit with a pad of paper and ask a list of questions. He thinks that's weird. And Corey will even say that. Corey hails from MTV, and he doesn't. That's not how he runs an interview. And he doesn't. He had a couple of notes. So he knew, a little bit more about people, but he didn't have his questions written down. It was all very organic. It was very just boom. And the first day, I definitely had a few people that were like, I don't know if I can do this. And, but it was every relationship with the people who were in there that I was already, friends with, every one of those relationships has grown stronger since that day.
Where did Omar come from? Because he was the only cop that I noticed.
So Omar was actually someone me and Scott went to high school with. Omar was a few years ahead of the two of us. So there's always a tie-in with Townsend somehow. And Omar was a high school graduate, ended up getting into law enforcement. Had a few pretty close calls over the years, and it was sort of he played football with Scott, so it was sort of a no-brainer to bring him in. And it was kind of cool because I hadn't seen Omar in probably 20 years. And we walked in the room and it was like we just saw each other last week. So it was kind of cool to have him as part of it too, because I know him in his own way also found new ways to heal by being part of this. So it was just overall just an amazing experience.
That's wonderful. And I went through and just watching all of them talk, it easily could have been the guys at my husband's firehouse, a collection of guys. I met a couple of lovely firefighters when I went and did a critical incident stress management course earlier this year. it just could have been any of them. And to have them, and you could, like you're saying, like you could tell some of them are a little more open and comfortable talking about their mental health and all that kind of thing. And some of them, you know, it definitely was not their probably favorite experience in the world. But I think it shows how much love and respect that they clearly have for you to open themselves up in such a vulnerable way to want to, you know, put it out there for the greater good.
I agree, you know, and I took that from the experience for sure. But for me, it also shows that these are people who really care about the rest of the first responder and the public. You know, they really care about people. We always joke, and I'm sure you know this. We always joke that we hate people. We say it all the time. Oh, I fucking hate people. We actually don't. We don't.
Yeah.
I love people. I want people to do better. I want people to be okay. I want people to be safe. I want to help people. And this experience gave these people who, you know, probably say this to themselves 3 times, 4 times a day or hour, an opportunity to do that. And they all succeeded. Every one of these people succeeded in helping someone in some way by bringing their experience into the limelight and being so vulnerable. And that's really what it's about, is just, you know, being a little vulnerable once in a while can do some amazing things in your life.
I wholeheartedly agree. And I would sort of quantify it by, like, again, that kind of, you know, living the fucking dream. I hate people, blah, blah, blah. But I think it's like, we hate stupid people. Like, I think that's what really gets under our grid. It's like, you wouldn't fucking be in this position if you weren't being a fucking dumbass. Like, switch on, mate. So...
But I wouldn't be here and I wouldn't have this job if there weren't stupid people.
This is true. Talk to me about because I know you've had like you had like that big screening up in, did you say it was in Townsend? Yep. So you had like one big screening. I know that you've had kind of like a couple of others along the way. Like, talk to me about the feedback that you've had since the documentary got released.
It's been really cool. So, you know, there's been obviously feedback from the first responder world and, you know, people associated with it. But then, like, because I put so much out on social media, I've had people that have nothing to do with it, nothing to do with the first responder world, even people I went to high school with that I actually haven't spoken to in almost 27 years, reach out and be like, bro, like this is huge. Thank you for putting this out. I've actually been able to look at stuff in my own life because of this. And that's really all I wanted. That's all of us wanted. And so the feedback's been really good. And I know, you know, Corey and Scott have been getting some feedback from like the Hollywood end of it, which has been very, very good. They actually were able to premiere it out at the Awareness Festival out in LA, which is a festival specifically for, like, you know, mental health stuff, social justice sort of films. Yeah, and it got a pretty good reception out there. Rob Riggle, who narrates it, was actually able to be at the premiere out there.
I feel like is he a native Bostonian? Really cool. I know the name.
I don't believe he is. He was actually, so his tie to this is that he was I believe he was a lieutenant colonel in the Marines. Yeah, and he got into acting late. He was in like Step Brothers, and you know, it's funny because when they told me he was going to narrate it, all I could picture was the scene in Step Brothers where he's talking about eating another guy's dick, and that's what I picture. Right? Is this guy who's going to be narrating a very serious film, being like that, and The Hangover, where he's a cop.
Oh, okay, yeah.
When he's like in the face when he tases the guy. And so all these things are going through my head, and I'm like, so Rob Riggle's going to narrate one of the, like, this guy, does he have a serious bone in him? So that's all really cool. And clearly he does, and he very much supports the mental health aspect of the military and first responder lifestyle. So it was really cool to have him part of it. And overall, the feedback's just been incredible.
And I think that was sort of something really important to point out too, was that like half of the people that spoke during the documentary were veterans, had prior military service, and I think it's super common that people come back and they join another public service, like they become a cop, they become a firefighter, and it
Mm-hmm.
seems very prevalent in the firefighter community to also then be a veteran. And then, you know, you look at all of the things that we've spoken about in terms of like your mental health and just how cumulative it must be for people like that. And I think it was I think Steve was sort of talking about it a lot, like he was a baby, like 19 years old. He was a
Mm.
baby and he was at war, and it was just, yeah, like heartbreaking to listen to, but again, like so lovely that he would be open to sharing his experiences, and like they all did, like they all
Mm.
deserve such you know, admiration from the general public. Because I think what I loved the most about the documentary was it I think it humanizes us. Like you said at the very beginning, like we are
Mm.
human beings, but we wear a uniform and we perform a role that not a lot of people understand. And you are like, you're not that like you're held to a higher standard, but I think people just don't fucking give us a second thought in terms of how we get affected by things, and to show our
Mm.
humanity in the way that you guys did. And there was it was remarkable. But um, there was a statistic that, and I think Rob sort of spoke it, and it said that first responders are 2% of the population, and yet they account for 20% of suicides. And
Yeah. Yeah. And it's like, you know, I think honestly, we're less than 2%. It's somewhere between 1.5% and 2%. And yeah, and these are numbers that we really don't have 100%
exactly.
statistics on, because, you know, causes of death can be fudged very, not necessarily in an intentional way, but on death certificates, there's cause of death. And if it's a hanging, they just put asphyxiation and the secondary isn't from hanging, it doesn't get
Yeah.
categorized as a suicide. And so, you know, the numbers could be a lot higher, and it's awful. But the biggest thing, the always thing I always tell people, even with a film, but anytime I present or talk about this, I always tell people this isn't about making a softer culture. This isn't about taking away the macho-ness of this job, but you have to be a tough person to be able to do this. That
Yeah.
doesn't dismiss this. However, this is about
Yeah.
making stronger people, stronger, more resilient people, because in the end of the day, if you don't deal with your traumas, it will affect, if it already isn't, it will affect your
Yeah.
life in some manner, and not necessarily in a good way. It may not be full end of the spectrum, like, you know, suicide attempts, but maybe it's alcoholism, maybe it's divorce, maybe it's domestic abuse, maybe it's losing your job before you're
Yeah.
ready to lose your job. Maybe it's not having an identity
Yeah.
when you retire, you know, and really it's about making stronger people. It's not about making it softer. We don't need to sit in kumbaya and hold each other's hands while we go into a burning building. You know, it's not necessarily that. You got to be
Yeah.
tough to do this job. That's why only, you know, 1.5% or so
Yeah.
can do it. But we can be stronger and we can heal from this and still be able
Yeah.
to do this
And
job.
yeah, I was talking to someone the other day, and they were saying it really like pisses him off, because he's like, he goes, I don't need like someone to come in and teach first responders how to be resilient. He's like, they are fucking resilient. Like, you need to teach them how to be more resilient, or how to handle better the things, because that they're already operating at a really fucking high level as it is in this day and age, with like everything they
Mm.
see and everything that collectively, you know, everyone's been through in like the last few years. So it's, and I think you said, like, you know, it's about striking that balance of being able to be professional, handle it in the time, but how do I balance out those dials? Once you come back to the station, once you go home, how do I cope appropriately so it doesn't lead me into that maladaptive fucking hole of all of the shit that,
Mm.
you know, it would be easy to find ourselves in.
And it is balancing act, because there's not dealing
Mm-hmm.
with it and avoiding it, and thinking you're doing all right until it catches up to you. And then there's, okay, when it's appropriate, I'm going to deal with this. I'm going to heal with it. I'm
Yep.
going to face it. And
Yep.
I'm going to be better for it. I'm going to be stronger. I'm going to be able to, you know, do another 10 years or 20 years of this, because I'm dealing with this
Yep.
as it's coming up.
Yep.
And that's really what I want. I want people to be able to have a 30, 35-year, 40-year career as a first responder, and have a healthy relationship with their spouse, with their family, with their kids, with
Yep.
themselves. we don't need to destroy, ourselves and everything around us, for the sake of being a tough guy or
Yeah.
girl on the
And
job.
I think that's what it's all about, really, isn't it?
It is. It's
All
about being
right.
human.
Where can people find first responders in crisis?
So there is on a lot of different apps and services, and I can give the list of that to you. But some of the bigger ones are like was it Vudu and then Amazon Prime, and then like Xfinity and DirecTV offer it. Are some of the bigger ones.
Okay.
Redbox.
Yep. So I watched it on Amazon Prime. That's how I found it. And
yep, you can rent or buy it right now. And then there's I think there's like 20 different apps, and most people have been able to find it. Most people have at least 10 different apps they're running on their
I know.
TV right now.
It's all a bit overwhelming at the moment with all the shit that we've got access to.
Yeah, especially like how you can access it. Like with the stuff you can do with watches now. I mean, at 45 years old, I remember when we didn't have the ability to make a phone call unless you were at home or a payphone.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? So so it's out there. It's on all the major apps for sure. And then feedback on it is incredible. So if anyone does watch it and they want to get me or you feedback, it would be really appreciated.
I will, if you're comfortable, Keith, I would love to pop your contact information in the show notes of this podcast episode, so people have that ability to reach out. And I can also pop some places as to where the documentary is available. And honestly, like I not just because Keith is sitting right in front of me virtually staring me at the face, like I honestly cannot recommend it enough. I think it's for everyone. It's not just for first responders. If you are one or a spouse of one, have been one, it definitely will hit you and resonate in a slightly different way. But like Keith and I just talked about, the way that it humanizes people in that profession, in that community, I think it would be incredibly eye-opening, and I highly, highly recommend anyone who is listening, please go watch it, please go buy it, please go rent it, just expose yourself to it, because I don't think you would regret it.
Thank you very much for saying that.
And
I appreciate that.
The last thing before we sort of wrap it up, because I do know that you have some other commitments to get to. You sort of mentioned briefly that either you're working on a book or something like that. Did you want to talk a little bit about that at all?
I actually do a lot of writing. I'm a contributor writer at Fire Engineering, the Firefighter Nation, and then I do some writing for the Volunteer Firefighter, which is a publication out of the Firefighters of the state of New York. I've been doing that for a little bit, and I did a chapter in Scars of Stars Volume 3, which is out. It got released on the 22nd of September. I've been writing my own book for a little bit, started as journaling, and I actually kind of wrote the whole thing. It ended up being like 150,000 words, which is a lot of writing, by the way. And I realized that because I did it over like 6 years, it kind of changed tones. So I'm sort of in the final editing, condensing editing of that book. I'm hopeful to get it out, possibly through a publisher, the beginning of 2024. And then I'm actually working sort of in a unofficial, but I can say I'm doing it sort of way with a researcher at McLean's and Harvard on some different projects that may manifest into some more writing to try to get more word out and more information out to first responders on mental health stuff.
Fantastic. Please keep me in the loop for if and when your book is released, because we could have you come back on to chat about it, or just equally share all the details. So that would be great to know about. All right.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much for your time today, Keith. I typically end the podcast episode by asking my guests 2 questions. So if you will be happy to indulge me. So the podcast name is I Will Hold Space for Your Darkness. And as Keith and I have sort of spoken about over the last hour or so, there is a lot of darkness that permeates around a first responder role, and whether we like it or not, it can touch us and affect us, and in all manner of ways. And so the first question that I like to ask people is, what do you do to hold space for your darkness?
You have to face it. And it comes back to what I said earlier.
Mm-hmm.
You got to own your shit. And you can't deny this stuff. Once you've been through it, you have to acknowledge that it's there. And so I sit with it. And that's one of the things I use mindfulness for. When I'm just not trying to be in the moment, I try to use it to sit with the things that I have been through so I can pull them apart and feel them. And so sitting with the darkness for me is really embracing the feeling of it. Because a lot of what we experience in the now is because of what was in the then. And so if you can feel it, you can trace it back. And a lot of times you can control your reaction to what it is. So that's how I hold my own darkness, is I have to feel it and own it.
I really like that. Thank you for sharing. And then the second question is, what can someone do? And whether it's a friend, whether it's a spouse, anyone in your life, what can someone do to help you and support you to hold space for your darkness like that?
I think it's being genuine. And I talk about this a lot with the peer support group I'm part of, is when you really want to help someone, you really got to put your own discomfort off to the side. Because I think as humans, especially first responders, we generally want to help people. And a lot of times we kind of, we cut our nose off to spite our face when someone starts talking about some heavy shit, and our discomfort takes over. So if you want to hold a space for someone else's darkness, be genuine. Be in a spot if you really want to. If you really want to help someone, be in the spot to be able to hear what you're going to be told, because you may not like what you're going to be told, and you have to be in a spot to put your own discomfort off to the side. So be genuine.
No, I really, really like that. And it's kind of, part of the reason of doing this podcast, and part of the reason why I do what I do is I am, I try to be that person where I'm like, I'm good and I'm ready to hear whatever it is that you need to disclose to me, and you're not going to scare me and you're not going to shock me, and I'm going to hold space for your darkness. And I think having...
And it's okay if they do. It's okay if they shock and scare you, but as long as you, as a person hearing it, can put that off to the side and help that person, just be genuine.
No, and I love that. And I think that's the perfect spot to wrap this up. All right, Keith, thank you so much for your time and joining me today. I've really appreciated our chat, and I'm really thankful for your ability to be so honest and open and forthright, and owning your shit and sharing it with everyone, because I think it really helps, and I think you are doing magnificent work, and I really hope that you keep going with it all.
No, I'll never stop, and I really appreciate the feedback, because it does help, because you don't get a lot of it. So,
all right. No worries.
Thank you for the words.
All right. This has been I Will Hold Space for Your Darkness. I'm your host, Erin Jane. Thank you for listening. And as always, let me listen in a way you've never been heard. Cheers.